How far do you agree with interpretation 2 about US intervention in Vietnam? Explain your answer using both interpretations and your knowledge of the historical context. Up to 4 marks of the total for this question will be awarded for spelling, punctuation, grammar, and use of specialist terminology. 20 marks. Here's the mark scheme for this question, which you can find out about in more detail in our overview video. But we do know that 16 marks here are awarded for AO4, which is your analysis and evaluation of interpretations. Now remember that the question's asking you how far you agree, so you need to give your reasoning, give a statement, and then explain it. So taking evidence from the interpretation and explaining how that supports your view. Developing this with contextual knowledge, statements which link what you've said back to the question and demonstrate the relevance of what you've said, is how you show that you can be analytical. The final 4 marks are awarded for your spelling, punctuation, and grammar. Here are the bottom 2 bands for this question. You might notice that we're seeing words like straightforward, little analysis, and not specific or not relevant. This might mean that you've maybe made statements to say, I agree with this interpretation, I don't agree with this interpretation, but you haven't really explained it in enough detail. Maybe you've only focused on interpretation 2, and really you need to be looking at both to make a justified opinion. You might need to bring in more of your contextual knowledge, or maybe the contextual knowledge that you have used is a bit too general to support what you've said. It might also mean that you've given statements, but you haven't really linked it back to the question. Remember that the question has asked us to focus on a particular topic, so try and make sure that you're keeping a really tight focus. In the top 2 bands, we can see that we need to be analytical, so we've explained our judgment in enough detail to really support what we've said. We've brought in relevant bits of our own knowledge, we've explained why we think what we do by linking all the evidence we've used back to the question, and we've looked at both interpretations to explain why we agree with one more than the other. In order to score in the top band though, you need to have made a justified overall judgment which you keep up all the way through the answer, so try not to sort of flick between one view and the other. Being consistent and being really clear on what you think is a great way to show the examiner that you're confident and that you are really convinced of your opinion and therefore score in the top band. Remember that 4 additional marks are available for your spelling, punctuation and grammar. Now that doesn't mean that you have to do anything different or special as such, but it's just a really good idea to take a bit more caution maybe. So once you've finished writing your answer, if you have time, just read through it quickly to see if you've made any silly mistakes, such as maybe sentences that are a bit too long, or words aren't spelt correctly and things like that. If you can use subject-specific vocabulary, then that's great, but don't feel like you have to put it in just to show the examiner that you know it. It's more important that you're using the right word that actually fits in the sentence than something technical that actually doesn't really work. Generally speaking though, as long as your spelling, punctuation and grammar are good enough that the examiner can understand what you mean, then you should be able to secure at least a couple of marks here. So don't worry too much about this. It doesn't matter too much really whether you choose to support or counter the claim, as long as you can back up what you're saying. Make sure that you also stay focused on the topic of the question and that the information you give is accurate. So let's take a look at some examples for if you chose to support the claim. You might, for instance, have argued that interpretation 2 depicts US intervention as negative. It argues that their support for Diem only heightened existing tensions within Vietnam. Now, if you can bring in some more evidence from your own knowledge and explain the relevance of that to the question, this can be a really nicely developed point to help you score in the top band. Do take a look at the rest of the points here though to see if there's anything you could have added to your answer.